Okay, today we are engaging with the fiction of British writer Hilary Mantel. And the sermon title is How to Be Ambitious. I'm wondering what kind of emotional response that title evokes in us. Some of us might already be tense and defensive, right? Ambition, Jared, that's not a very biblical word. What's going on here? That's not one of the fruits of the Spirit. So why are we talking about ambition at all? Others of us may be feeling just a little bit nervous. Now wait a minute, okay, if we are talking about ambition in worship, shouldn't we be talking about how to get less of it rather than more? And still maybe there are others of us here this morning who might be expectant or even curious because we've always been conflicted about our own ambitions and the ambitions of others, and we've wondered what to do with it or about it. You'll notice that in talking about ambition in this morning's sermon, I'm also talking about some other things like power and desire and identity and wealth and success. But for the most part, I'm going to let the term ambition do the heavy lifting this morning. So first, I want you to hear several passages from Scripture that bear on this question of ambition, and then we'll continue. So friends, listen now in these readings for God's voice to you. This first cluster of passages, I suppose, are mostly warnings about ambition. From Mark 9, the disciples, entered Capernaum. When they had come into a house, Jesus asked them, "What were you arguing about during the journey?" They didn't respond, since on the way they had been debating with each other about who was the greatest. He sat down, called the 12, and said to them, "Whoever wants to be first must be least of all and the servant of all." And just to prove that they didn't get it, and we still don't get it, a chapter later, James and John, Zebedee's sons, came to Jesus and said, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask." "What do you want me to do for you?" Jesus asked. And they said, "Allow one of us to sit on your right and the other on your left when you enter your glory." That conversation didn't go well, by the way. Then from 1 Corinthians 10, just a little snippet, but I think it's a helpful warning. No one should look out for their own advantage, but they should look out for each other. From Philippians 2, instead of each person watching out for their own good, watch out for what is better for others. Now, I don't know. I'll leave this up to you. Are those warnings about ambition, or are those warnings about selfish ambition? I think that's a question that runs through this whole sermon this morning. Now, this next little selection of passages, I think these are more about recalibrating or reimagining what ambition might be in a faithful context, okay? Now, last Sunday was Pentecost Sunday. We still have this beautiful banner up here. So in the spirit of Pentecost from Acts 2, in the last days, God says, "I will pour out my spirit on all people. Your sons and daughters will prophesy. Your young will see visions. Your elders will dream dreams." Now, what is that if not a beautiful picture of collective dreaming and ambition? Everybody gets the Spirit. Everybody dreams, young and old, men and women alike. So I'm wondering maybe if to be Christian just is to be ambitious as part of a community where everyone else's ambition is just as important as mine. Then from 1 Corinthians 14, since you are ambitious for spiritual gifts, and that community was, use your ambition to try to work toward being the best at building up the church. So sort of a re-aiming, a reorientation of ambition. From 1 Timothy 3, this saying is reliable if anybody has a goal to be a supervisor, right? That word means overseer in the Greek, or what we would call an elder in the congregation, a leader. If anyone has the goal to be a leader in the church, they want a good thing. So it's not wrong to want to be in front, to want to be in charge, to want to be a leader, to want to have influence. Finally, from Matthew 6, this is the Lord's Prayer that you pray often, if not every week. And I want you to realize that I think you're praying one of the most ambitious prayers I can imagine, right? It includes this: Lord, bring in your kingdom so that your will is done on earth as it is in heaven. You're praying that not just as a spectator, right? God, come and fix something from up there or out there. That prayer is an involving prayer. It's a participatory prayer. You're praying to be a part of this energetic, ambitious movement to make God's kingdom manifest on earth. May God bless the reading of Holy Scripture. Okay, so a little about Hilary Mantel. A British novelist, Mantel, has written a series of 3 novels of historical fiction centered on the period of King Henry VIII in the 16th century. The trilogy of books includes Wolf Hall, which came out in 2009, then Bring Up the Bodies in 2012, and then for those of us who were reading it as soon as it came out, this agonizing wait for the 3rd installment, The Mirror and the Light, not until 2020. She won the Man Booker Prize for the first 2, so lots of accolades for her and this series. I said they focus on the period of King Henry VIII, and they do, but neither the king, nor Catherine of Aragon, Anne Boleyn, Jane Seymour, or any of the other wives, nor Thomas More, nor Cardinal Wolsey, nor any of the other important dukes or earls shine as the protagonists of Mantel's fiction. That role is reserved for Thomas Cromwell, who's the son of a blacksmith and a brewer from the backwater little no-name hamlet of Putney. Cromwell rises almost inexplicably to become a consigliere, dirty fixer, and chief minister to King Henry VIII, and to become the most important person in England besides the king. It's an astonishing rise to power. The first book charts Cromwell's rise in tandem with his work to get rid of the king's first wife. The second book, he keeps rising higher and higher, even as he gets rid of Anne Boleyn. And then in the third book, Cromwell meets his fate as a tragically flawed hero. And if you're saying, hey, wait a minute, I was going to read that, that's a spoiler, you could have Googled that in like 10 seconds and known that's the arc of it, if you didn't remember that from history. So I didn't spoil that for you. Mantel's version of Cromwell is of an omnicompetent figure. He can do it all. This is a quote. He's at home in courtroom or waterfront, bishop's palace or inn yard. He can draft a contract, train a falcon, draw a map, stop a street fight, furnish a house, and fix a jury. Probably gives you a sense of how talented Mantel is as a writer. In Cromwell's travels abroad to France, Belgium, and Italy, he's been a soldier, a trader, and an accountant for a bank. He's killed a man and also learned how to appreciate fine silk and Italian paintings. One reviewer writes, quote, in Wolf Hall, Mantel persuasively depicts this beefy pin pusher and backstairs maneuverer as one of the most appealing and in his own way enlightened characters of the period, end quote. Just a bit more about Cromwell, and then we'll get on with thinking about ambition for ourselves. In the fiction, Cromwell uses all of these various skills to orchestrate England's break with Rome over Henry's desire to get rid of one wife and divorce a wife, Catherine, and get another. Cromwell oversaw the dissolution of the monasteries in England, and then, of course, the transfer of all of their vast treasures to the king's account. Cromwell has spies and informants everywhere. He's almost unbounded in his knowledge and skills. He knows ironwork, culinary arts, the cloth trade, finance, civil engineering, legislation, and diplomacy. In terms of court intrigue and revenge, he always appears several moves ahead of all of his opponents. He is, among other things, an interesting picture of what ambition sometimes does and can look like. Now, this is, of course, historical fiction. I'm not into historical fiction. I don't like historical fiction. So I was surprised that I even liked these books. Mantel, the novelist, has it worked to persuade us to imaginatively inhabit the 16th century England, and she does it well. And so far, in this sermon, I've focused on the swelling ambition of Thomas Cromwell, but there are other ambitions in the book. And we're going to talk about lots of different kinds of ambition this morning. There's the ambition of the Tudor kings, the ambitions of the various rival families who seek the throne for themselves, the ambition of Anne Boleyn and Jane Seymour, the ambition of Catholic Thomas More, the ambition of the Protestant Bible translator William Tyndale, not to mention the smaller, quieter ambitions of those whose labor and lives are limited by their roles as subjects in a vast monarchy. And Mantel does an impressive job of detailing the aspirations of those with little wealth or cultural power, but still, through all this, her primary focus is on powerful Europeans when Europe was a global empire, right? So you're right to be wondering if a story about a 16th century white, married, able-bodied male is really a story that can be interesting for all of us. It's my question too. You're already thinking historically about the ways we understand ideals like ambition, about the way it gets shaped by whatever culture we're in. Mantel's version of Thomas Cromwell offers us one example of an ambitious life. The interesting question, I suppose, is whether you find yourself wanting to be like him or not. I don't mean that you literally want the arc of your life to begin with an abusive alcoholic father and then ascend to the dizzying heights of political power where you're one of the most powerful people on earth. Maybe that is the goal for some of you, but I don't mean it quite so literally. I mean rather whether his knack for getting the life he wants calls out to something in you. Whether his risk-taking and uninhibited way of changing himself across the course of his life evokes something in you like jealousy. It does for me. And this morning, I'll be blunt. I want you to welcome your ambition more than you resist it or deny it or explain it away. When I say that, I don't mean that I want you to take yourself all that seriously. Our ambitions, like everything else about us, are often rather silly. So what would it be like to take up a somewhat curious and playful posture towards even our largest, most expansive ambitions? Now, it's true that the Bible gives us good reasons to be wary. We read some of them this morning. Or at least curious and playful about our ambitions. Our dreams about success and satisfaction and pleasure are often bent away from what's good for us and for others, bent away from what's good for the earth's well-being and the creatures who inhabit it. That's why we continue to find it helpful to hang on to this old-fashioned word, sin, and why we confess sort of some of the ways our lives are distorted every day in worship. In our faith tradition, we don't talk about sin as a way of fostering shame or embarrassment. We're not trying to get stuck in it. Instead, we show up each day with joy and peace because, we just believe that whatever's wrong with us has already been loved and forgiven. Move on, right? Move ahead. God's delight in us and in all things keeps us from getting hung up on our sin. And one of the reasons to keep this language around is that it helps us see more of reality. And I think that's true as we're talking today about ambition. So what does sin have to do with ambition? Well, the Bible describes us as the kind of creatures who are prone to idolatry. And we're already in the 16th century today, so why not just hang out there a little longer? John Calvin, the 16th century French leader, considered the leader of Reformed or Presbyterian expressions of Christian faith, describes our imaginations as, quote, a perpetual workshop of idols. On this view, more often than not, we don't even know what we want. More often than not, we're in tenacious pursuit of rewards and satisfaction that will turn out to have been a complete mirage. We're easily tempted to get in the grip of things that aren't good for us. We're suckers for misidentifying what will make us happy in the end. To be blunt, when it comes to getting what we want, dialing into our desires, we just aren't very skilled. We're capable of fixating on projects that will disappoint us. We invest in dreams that end up being decoys. We pursue forms of success or satisfaction that end up leaving us frustrated and confused. That's Calvin, but I still think he has something to say. And the Bible. Now, if you are a skilled idolater, and I think you are, then what does that suggest about how to be ambitious? I think one good way to be ambitious is to be ambitious as part of a larger community of faith. There might be a variety of reasons to belong to an ancient wisdom way like Christianity or like one of the other great faiths. But for me, just knowing that I'm an idolater is a pretty good reason to make sure I'm in pattern relationships with other people who are also hearing God's call towards an always more common good. So to belong to a congregation like Second Pres, like many others, requires no more profound conviction that we are great at being distracted and we need help. By living in loving and caring relationships with one another, we can remind each other to stay flexible, to sit loose with regard to our dreams and our desires. It doesn't mean that we necessarily need to change our ambitions, but we might need to change how tightly we're holding on to them. We may not need to give up our ambitions, but we might need to stop being so serious so that we can begin opening the door to laughing at ourselves now and then. Along these lines, we might benefit from asking where we got our ambitions in the first place. Have you ever stopped and thought about that? All the dreams that you have, where did I get these things? Usually we get them from growing up in families and just being part of a wider culture. Most of the things we desire aren't all that peculiar or unique. It's just stuff that got put there by our parents or advertisements. I bought a dress shirt at Costco once, not this one, but a different one. The thought did run through my head that I'm buying a dress shirt sitting on a heap of about 500 other identical shirts. But the part of me that loves the idea of getting a dress shirt for $17 overrode the part of me that was whispering, won't it feel weird if you go to an event and there are 37 other people wearing the exact same dress shirt? Now, whether our ambitions involve getting a better job, having a family, living in a particular neighborhood, acquiring that second home, traveling with friends, or something else, right? Those are pretty common desires and dreams. Taking these ambitions seriously, deathly seriously, would kind of be like denying that you bought the Costco dress shirt off the enormous pile just like everyone else. I'll put this quote up on the screen. This is from Adam Phillips, and he writes, quote, "What is acculturation?" By that, he just means being part of a culture, sort of absorbing trends in the wider culture. What is acculturation, if not the formulation, tacitly or otherwise, of the individual's aims and objectives? To grow up is to learn what it is to be better. In other words, you just inherited from the wider culture what progress or self-improvement or what getting what you want looks like. So much depends upon the available pictures we have of what it is for us to be better than we are or to improve. So we learn how to be ambitious in the only way it can happen. Life experience provides us with, in Philip's words, available pictures of pleasure, of desire, success, of aspiration. We learn about acceptable paths for self-improvement by being acculturated. Initially, it's our parents who help us work out what kinds of things it's okay to hope for and dream for. But our larger culture, the economy, and our educational system are working nonstop to bend our ambitions in very particular directions. Again, this quotation will be on the screen. Social psychologist Lynn Layton puts it like this, quote, "Wherever you're socially located, there's going to be some ideal way that you are encouraged to be in that location. And when you're not like that, you often will be shamed for not being like that, and it will cause psychological conflict that you may end up continuing to act out to your own detriment," end quote. So I read her as saying that one of the cultural messages we get is if you're black or brown, you should act like this. If you're a woman, you should behave like that. And on, all these social rules go. And all of them tend to constrict what we can imagine, the kinds of ambition that we can imagine. All of them get us in their grip, and in this way we get alienated from some of our ambitions that don't necessarily follow those cultural scripts. Now, some people of faith live in a rather defensive posture. This is not me, I don't think it's you, right? But some religious people, when you listen to them talk, you get this sense that sort of the religious insiders, it's safe, it's pure, and everything out there is dirty or dangerous, right? That's not how I see the world, and I have a much more positive and appreciative view of culture, so I'm talking about the dangers of culture, but I value culture, and I would bet that most of you do too, or you never would have called me to be your transitional pastor. But I do think, this is what I say this morning about ambition, I do think that culture can make you sick. American culture can teach young black and brown boys and girls to question their worth and their value. That's a sick culture. American culture conveys the idea that those with inherited wealth, those with access to capital, those kinds of people are more insightful, better leaders. They're more strategic than those who labor and work with their hands. That's a sick culture. Now, 2 examples. We could multiply all those examples, right, of the sickness, but the point is simple. Forms of ambition that take shape in a sick culture will often be, you got it, sick forms of ambition. So if you and I want to welcome healthy and wise forms of ambition in our own lives, we'll have to put ourselves in some kind of minority culture, right? Like this one or something else. Some kind of thoughtful media landscape. Some kind of courageous wisdom way. Places that are themselves life-giving, wise, healing, and healthy, so that some of our ambitions can be bent in more interesting directions. Again, a quotation for the screen. There's a little chapter in John Kabat-Zinn's book. The book's called Wherever You Go, There You Are. Wonderful book. But the chapter begins this way, quote, "What is my job on the planet?" That is one question we might do well to ask over and over again. Otherwise, we may wind up doing someone else's job and not even know it, end quote. This is why I don't want to give up on the word ambition. To shrink from our ambition as citizens, as members of a faith community, as parents, friends, children, gardeners, sowers, whatever it is we do, makers, artists. To shrink from our ambition can only mean to squander our precious time imitating someone else's life, doing someone else's job. In the chapter, Kabat-Zinn tells the story of Buckminster Fuller, inventor of the geodesic dome, an important figure in the range of discoveries that contributed to chemistry and other sciences. By his early 30s, a string of business failures left Fuller so despondent that he found himself contemplating suicide. He'd made such a mess of his life, he was such a failure, he felt, that his wife and daughter would be better off without him. But in that moment of despair, he made a curious choice. Instead of ending his life that night, he decided to live as if he died. As if he had died. So Kabat-Zinn writes this, quote, "The rest of his life would be a gift. Instead of living for himself, he would devote himself to asking, what is it on this planet that needs doing, that I know something about, that probably won't happen unless I take responsibility for it?" Or as Kabat-Zinn puts the question, what is my job on the planet with a capital J? Now, if you put this question at the center of your life, if you start asking yourself this question and keep on asking it, what's my job with a capital J? If you stay at it like a dog with a bone, this question will lead you to some interesting and adventurous places that you never would have gone otherwise. The chapter ends with a quotation from Ralph Waldo Emerson. Again, I'll put this on the screen. Quote, "Insist on yourself, never imitate. Your own gift you can present every moment with the cumulative force of a whole life's cultivation. But of the adopted talent of another," this is when you try to imitate or just do something because your culture says you should, right? "The adopted talent of another, you have only an extemporaneous half possession." And here's the line I like. "Do that which is assigned to you, and you cannot hope too much or dare too much." Too much. Too much. That's really our worry about ambition, isn't it? That our ambitions are too much. Our hopes and dreams are too much. That we're making too much of ourselves. This fear of our own too muchness, this fear of getting too big, of transgressing some imaginary limit. This often masquerades under the disguise of modesty, humility, and selflessness. But I want to ask you as I close this morning, what if these attempts to evade our own too muchness turn out to be our own way of hiding from the white-hot center of our aliveness? What if our fear of being too much is at bottom nothing more than a way of avoiding what Emerson refers to as, quote, "that which has been assigned to you"? What if there's a vocation, a calling, a job with a capital J, which could feed a beautiful, ambitious contribution to the good of our places, to the good of our communities, to the good of our families and our neighborhoods? Friends, if we have a calling, there cannot be too much of it. Ambition is just the name we give to the experience of living in the grip and the energy of our calling. So for the sake of the world and for the sake of your neighbors, I beg you, listen for God's voice calling you into a meaningful and satisfying life. Let that listening unfold in a community of caring others who can help you clarify what you're hearing. Then get busy doing what you've been called to do.